We are ready. Okay.
Zoom, shall I start?
Just a moment.
Okay.
没事，先不用，现在。先全景。OK， 他说了以后再开始。OK。
OK。
去叫一下安迪。你去叫一下安迪。开始。Let's begin.
Okay, let's begin. Should I wait for them? They're talking. Just a moment.
Harvey, can you hear me?
Harvey, we can't hear you.
Sorry for the technical problem, but we want to make it as good as possible. So sorry for a little delay. Yeah. So can you hear Harvey?
Yeah, fine. Can you hear me?
Oh, good. Okay, that's
Okay,
great. So Andy, we'll have you online now. Yeah, let's
Andy,
start.
I'm sorry
Let's
for
start.
the time change. Time change caught me. Sorry, the time zones.
Okay.
No, that's good. We have a few minutes delay. So maybe we can start.
Let's start. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on the time zone you're in. And welcome to the launch of Center for China and Globalization's latest book, which is The Ebb and Flow of Globalization. This book is a part of 5 books so far in the series of China and Globalization by CCG. A brief introduction. Globalization is, of course, an unstoppable force. And given the high stakes at hand, stability, continued growth, and the future of our planet, it is more important than ever that China gains a deeper understanding of the world and vice versa. Dr. Huiyao Wang, the author of this book, in his latest work, The Ebb and Flow of Globalization, was recently published by Springer Nature. The book features a selection of his writings published between 2016 and 2021 by domestic and overseas media, a very decisive period in China's journey towards globalization and economic reform and opening up. This book focuses on globalization and China evolving in the world. The essays center on 3 interconnected themes: China's remarkable development under its policy of reform and opening up, China's deepening integration into the global economy, and rise in an increasingly multipolar world, and the quest to reinvigorate global governance and multilateralism to address the pressing global challenges of the 21st century. It is one of the few works in English that looks at China and the development of globalization from the perspective of a Chinese scholar, and a Chinese scholar who indeed requires not much of an introduction at all. Dr. Huiyao Wang is founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, a think tank ranked among the top 100 think tanks in the world. He is also dean of the Institute of Development Studies and of Southwestern University of Finance and Economics of China, vice chairman of China Association for International Cooperation, and director of Chinese People's Institute of Foreign Affairs. He is currently a steering committee member of the Paris Peace Forum and an advisory board member of the Duke Kunshan University. He pursued his PhD studies at University of Western Ontario and the University of Manchester. He was senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School and visiting fellow of Brookings Institute and an adjunct professor at Peking University. In addition to its top ranking as a world think tank, CCG also is a non-governmental Chinese think tank that has been granted special consultative status by the United Nations. So this afternoon, we will come together with Dr. Huiyao Wang and many experts to discuss the importance of this book, the content of this book, and the way forward. So we are pleased to be joined by William Akaur, who is editorial director for business, economics, and political science and law at Springer Nature, by Dr. Wang himself, the author of the book, and a panel of experts: David Blair, economist and writer; Harvey Zodin, Senior Consultant of the National Image Communication Research Center at Tsinghua University. Liana Lee, Regional Director for Books, China Springer Nature. Alistair Mishi, Secretary General, British East Asia Council, and Andy Mock, who is a commentator at CGTN. The discussion will revolve around how globalization will develop in the future, how will great power relations and the balance of power change in the 21st century, how China can promote multilateralism, and can regionalization and globalization eventually reinforce each other. And I will be your humble host for today, Zoon Ahmed Khan, Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. So now, without further ado, let's warmly welcome William Akawer for his welcoming opening remarks.
Thank you, Zoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm William Akawer, Editorial Director, Business Economics, Politics, and Law from Springer Nature. It's nice to join you all virtually today from Singapore, where I'm based. Let me first thank CCG for the opportunity to say a few opening remarks to celebrate the launch of this 5th volume in the series China and Globalization, edited by Wang Huiyao and Lu Miao. This 5th volume, The Ebb and Flow of Globalization, Chinese Perspectives on China's Development and Role in the World, is authored by Wang Huiyao himself. The book features a chronological set of articles composed by Wang Huiyao over the course of 2016 to 2021, covering a range of topics related to China's development and its globalization. The volume is divided into 3 parts, with section 1 focusing on China's domestic development, section 2 looking at China's rise and external relations across the world, and section 3 exploring the strains in our current system of global governance and what we all need to do to reform and innovate in this 21st century. I'd like to focus briefly on Wang Huiyao's introductory chapter in this new book. The introduction features a personal account from the author about the dawn of China's opening up and reform. Readers experience the excitement and enthusiasm of the opening up and reform during the late 1970s directly via the author's own personal experiences and dreams for a bright future. As readers, we find ourselves picturing a young man with a thirst for knowledge and a great affection for reading books, as well as a teenager from the Sichuan capital of Chengdu, leaving the big city for a village 30 kilometers away as part of the Down to the Countryside movement, just shortly before the reform and opening up would become reality. We experience via a young man's own poetry, optimism for a bright future in the line, "Though I stay in this cold room, the wind and clouds of the world fill my chest." The story then takes an exciting turn in that the author learns in late 1977 that the Gaokao would be reinstated by the end of the year. The Gaokao had been suspended since 1966, but would be reintroduced as part of Deng Xiaoping's oversight of science and education and his return to the political scene. This was a life changer for the author, who in the spring of 1978 was accepted to the English and American Department of Literature at the Guangzhou Foreign Language Institute. He, along with a few 100,000 more youth, including current Premier Li Keqiang at the time, would be part of the Xinsanjie, or the new 3 classes of students. Later we learn about the author's appointment to the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation, now known as the Ministry of Commerce. During those early days of the reform and opening up, the author experienced a particularly exciting period in which he could make a difference himself in terms of international commercial development for a rapidly developing China, but also he would discover the groundwork and foundation for the private think tank he'd established nearly three decades later, the Center for China and Globalization. Like the chronological sequence of Wang Huiyao's articles from 2016 to 2021 that feature in this volume, the introductory chapter also tells the story over a definite time span. From the excitement of the reform and opening up, to the economic miracle of China's development, through the global financial crisis, all the way towards the current geopolitical challenges across the planet we face today, Wang Huiyao tells his own life story. I'd like to thank him on the publication of this new volume, which will be yet another terrific contribution to the series, China and Globalization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. And thank you, especially, understanding the context of this book, also the context in which Dr. Wang began the journey of starting a think tank that is indeed helping people understand China in a better way. So now, without any further ado, let's welcome Dr. Wang Huiyao to understand the book in a deeper way.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zoom. And I know that you're also doing your doctor's studies at Tsinghua University. I would very much like to thank William Archer and, of course, our old friend now for Springer Nature's support of the China and Globalization series, and also to Dr. Li, the China director for Springer Nature as well, but also the distinguished scholars that we had today from Harvey Dozy in Europe, and David Blair, and also Andy Mork, and also other online friends. So I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to present our latest book. Of course, you can see we have a 5-series book now, and this is the 5th book of the China Globalization series, which I think already had a worldwide download over 2.4, 2.5 billion already, and thanks to Springer Nature's a great support. And also, I think it's really something CCG is very proud of, to provide some unique perspectives that gather the opinions from all over the world and experts, top leaders, to give their perspective. So for the book today, I'd like to maybe give a little PPT to give some introduction of my latest book. So I called it The Ebbs and the Flow of Globalization, which means, there's ups and downs, there's a trend that we have to watch. So this is really Chinese perspectives on China's development and role in the world. And so this is, we are launching this book officially today. We've been soft launching for some time, but this is really official launching. And really, we are still at the crossroads of globalization. And I think this is really one of the 5th series, a part of this series, the 5th book of this series, which is personally contribute to that. So I think that the Chinese perspectives on China's development and roles in the world is a comprehensive view, probably, of the China-related policy issues. So this book primarily focuses on globalization and China's evolving role in the world, offers some unique perspectives on really a turbulent period that began with Donald Trump's election and ended with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still, we haven't gone through that completely. So this period, I would describe that in the last 5 years, saw a global landscape reshaped by China's continued rise, intensified great power competition, obviously, and public health crisis that changed the way how we live today. I would say this book actually selected almost 60 articles, op-eds, and papers I published from 2016 to 2021 for a number of domestic and international media, of course, including the Beijing Review and Bloomberg, China Daily, CGTN, Financial Times, Global Times, Indian Express, Munich Security Conference, South China Morning Post, many of them. I have a volume actually published regularly at South China Morning Post, and also other think tanks like Wilson Center, World Economic Forum, and many more. Of course, recently I also contributed articles to the New York Times, to the Economist, and so we hope that we can putting our next book. But again, I think we take 5 years as a very intensive period of time. Our reflections, our viewpoints. So we see those changes, turning points, progress, and setbacks in the geopolitics and economic cooperation and global governance. So that's why we call it ebb and flow of globalization. So basically, this book is divided into 3 parts with 11 chapters in all, and each part focuses on different aspects of CCG work and stories of China and globalization. So the part 1 is Vectors of Chinese globalization. Basically, we give a description of China's remarkable development and its policy reform and opening up. Particularly the opening up. I think that is really, one of the greatest successful therapy of China to have in the last 4 decades. And again, we see that emphasized in the 20th Party Congress. China's door will open wider, and we're going to seek high quality development rather than high speed. So I think this is really China's globalization is pushing forward with this high quality and continuous open up. The part 2 actually talk about China's rise in the multipolar world. Since the Second World War, since the Bretton Woods system in the 1940s set up, we see a world is used to be China, used to be US and the Soviet Union, and then for a long time was a US dominated the world. But now we're starting to see a rise of China, but that's more multiple, the EU and BRICS economy and many other countries. So this part really deals with a multipolar world and China's role in that. And part 3 is basically I give more thought on the reinvigorate, revitalize basically the multilateral system. So the multilateral system we see in the last 7 decades, 8 years already, that needs to be upgraded, needs to be enhanced, and needs to be improved. And China probably can play a very important role to address that global governance deficit and help and work along with other countries to really work with global south to improve that. So I think, basically we have, as Bill kindly mentioned, I had drafted a very long introduction of the book. Basically, it tells about the journey of China's opening up and reform, and also mention quite a bit of our personal experience and stories. And then we have a chapter, Vectors of China's, part 1, of course. So we talked about roles in trade and investment, the rise of Chinese multinational, education, talent, and culture, people-to-people exchanges, and then reflection on the changing. So the part 2 is basically China's rise in the multi-world and reflection of a changing international order, Chinese diplomacy, track to diplomacy in a changing world. And of course, the US-China relation is always at this core period, since the trade war, the decoupling, the sanctions, and all those that the bumps, ups and downs that we have in these 5 years. And China rose in a more integrated Asia. We see RCEP, we see CPTPP is making, and of course, China-EU relation is very important that we need to continue to strengthen the cooperation. And part 3 of this book is basically to invigorate a multilateral system. We see the multilateral system from the last 76 years is really making a lot of progress and prosperity for the world. But of course, we need to, we see also a lot of challenges. We need to really upgrade that. We need to find a way to forward free trade. We need to probably also provide some public goods like Belt and Road. We need to work with all the P3W and Euro gateway to the world. So we have to work together. So I think this book is really an interesting one, provide a lot of our research and our viewpoints for our contemporary world. And so now actually in this book, we talked about, from modernist society to modern society, which we said a few years ago. Now that has been reflected. You can see that in the 20th Party Congress, basically emphasized we need to build China into a modern society by the mid of the century. and also smartened up and taking the lead. That's also China is trying to do technology-wise, and particularly in the clean energy sector, building a global talent hub for China's future development. Again, China becomes a magnet to attract global talent. I hope China can do more. It can really speed up the mobility of the talent and relax the more controls barriers of blocking that from more happening. And also, of course, beyond the Westness, building a more inclusive order for the new decade, and China-U.S. relation at 40 different dreams, the shared future, looking back and beyond the Merkel era, which we see a new German Prime Minister Scholz now in place, and also why China should lead the mission to save alien WTO and revive multilateralism. China is the biggest trading nation in the world. China should play more role to promote WTO to be more successful. And of course, build back better. How can that be more work together with US and EU on Belt and Road and AIB on global infrastructure, and not only just competition, but we have to really do more to cooperate. So this is really a nutshell of our latest book, The Ebbs and Flow of Globalization. But I'd like to take this opportunity to mention again, this is already the part 5 of our series book. This is, the series book which we have published by the Springer, has really provided a balanced global perspective by gathering views of highly influential policy scholars, practitioners, opinion leaders from China and around the world. So we have 5 books in a row. Basically, the first one is Consensus or Conflict. This is really very highly downloaded, very highly watched, gathered the 37 world-renowned experts around the world. And then the second book that we edited is The Asian 21st Century, authored by Kishore Mahbani, a well-known scholar, famously internationally. And this book surprised all of us, has more than 2 million downloads worldwide. And again, also, this is a great book of the series. The third book, China and the World in a Changing Context, Perspectives from Ambassadors in China. We actually invited 27 ambassadors in China. Each contribute a chapter or a section of the book, give a very diversified views on China, from European ambassadors, from Japanese ambassadors, from Australian ambassadors, from many ambassadors, Canadian ambassadors. And so those are really, and also African, Asian, Latin American ambassadors. So it's really a well-represented a global view. While this pandemic has locked down, people cannot come to each other. Ambassadors play a more important role in bridge the gap. So their views is highly reflected in this book. And then we have a fourth book, Transition and Opportunity, Strategies for multinational, for global business leaders, multinationals in China. So we have chambers, we have CEOs, we have chairmen. It was really great. And reflecting the business view, also almost 30 business leaders, chairmen, president contributed. And finally is the book we released today, The Ebbs and Flow of Globalization, which reflect the CCG's view and my personal view. So this is really a great book series. So on top of that, we actually, maybe we can predict a little bit. We also have a CCG Global Dialogues coming up. In the past 2 years, we have done a number of global dialogues with global opinion leaders from, Professor Graham Allison, Joseph Nye, Thomas Friedman, Larry Summers, Angus Deaton, Martin Wolf, John Thornton, Pascalami, and Larry Summers. You name it. We have so many of them. And this book is coming up again. So Understanding Globalization, Global Gaps and the Power Shifts in the 21st Century will be published by Hargreaves. And this is coming up. So I'm going to do a little advertisement for our next book. This is also edited by me and Dr. Miao. Out of CCG, we gathered about 17 prominent global scholars and leaders, opinion leaders' views for our dialogue. Basically, I was in a dialogue with them in the last 2 years, during the pandemic, since we can't meet each other. So I hope this is a good book that we're going to launch very soon. So again, thank you very much for introduction of our book. I hope that we have a more introduction. Would like to hear our leaders, our scholars. Thank you again. Thank you. And also our audience and our viewers that are going to see this launch. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wang. And indeed, I mean, at CCG, we do believe that globalization is the ultimate common value. As scholars, as think tanks, we are trying to promote a vision and a view that helps unite different perspectives. And when in this book, as well as our experts will later comment, the ebb and flow of globalization, we are understanding a country's journey that has been remarkable, and that is encouraging different regions of the world rise to the occasion and think about clear solutions in a world where we clearly need to address many shared challenges. So to discuss this and more and their specific views on the book, let me firstly welcome David Blair, who is economist and writer. David Blair will share his perspective on the book and maybe help our audience understand better what is the key message that the book is communicating.
We are certainly in one of the ebbs of globalization that Henry talks about. I would say we're in an extreme ebb. This is a time when many people and governments around the world are opposing the idea of globalization. And I think his book is a very timely and much needed reminder of the benefits that millions, billions of people around the world have received from globalization. Like William, I especially enjoyed the new section where Henry discussed the impact of reform and opening up on his own life. This is a great illustration of the profound improvement in millions of people's lives within China, brought about due to globalization, a fundamental change in the way people have lived. Essentially, almost everybody in China has benefited from not only reform and opening up, but globalization more broadly. Also in that chapter, as a probably naive foreigner, I had always thought the idea of being sent to the countryside didn't sound so bad. You know, it sounded sort of romantic and interesting. And Henry's description of what life in the countryside was like in the 1970s was very deep and very sort of moving. And I spend a good bit of time in the countryside in China now, and I see the way people live, and it's nothing like Henry described in the 1970s. Life is pretty good. They live in good houses. They have plenty of food to eat. They have opportunities for advancement, many of them. So I think there's been a big improvement in the lives of the Laobaixing, the ordinary people in China. Not only the scholars, but also sort of the ordinary people have much, much better lives because of a long, long process of reform tied with opening up. And I want to stress it's the process that mattered. It was reform tied with opening up. I strongly agree with Henry's point that appropriate reform has to be tied with opening up. Many developing countries have had very bad experiences with opening up because they didn't tie it with reform. The reforms and the process of sequential opening and sequential reforms tied to the opening up are essential to making it work for countries that are coming out of a developing situation. In the United States now, and I think in Europe similarly, there's a lot of opposition to globalization. But I don't think globalization is to blame. I think during the past 30 to 40 years, there have been a lot of bad reforms in the US, which I know most deeply. We've seen reckless monetary and fiscal policy, especially in the last 20 years. We've had a zero interest rate policy almost continuously, which has contributed greatly to the inequality, which is causing a lot of damage in the United States. we had banking reforms that concentrated economic power and encouraged banks to take non-productive risks. They could make more money by going into non-productive, highly risky behavior than they could by the traditional path of actually lending to productive enterprises. And we've had non-enforcement of antitrust laws. And we didn't have to do that. That was not an essential part of opening up. But globalization is getting blamed for those bad policies. I think Henry's book can be read as a manual for the right kind of reform and globalization. His chapters go into historical depth about the reform and the opening up. And I think he very strongly ties the two together. And I think that's a real strength for the book. And I think it's something that needs to be learned by countries around the world.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, David, indeed. And I think especially the part where China is increasingly reaching out to countries, developing countries as well, there is a sense of different experiences of different countries need to be understood. China's experience is unique. It is successful. It is helping developing countries also think more creatively. So I do think many of the chapters in the book that go into so much detail can help people across the world think more creatively when it comes to problem solving, which is at the end of the day, what we're all trying to achieve when we talk about SDGs or improvement. Next, let's invite Harvey Zodin, who is Senior Consultant of the National Image Communication Research Center of Tsinghua University. Harvey, your thoughts on the book. Why must people across the world read it?
I'm very happy to be here and congratulate Henry and Springer on this book, which is really a blueprint for future cooperation and global development. It made me smile, and it also made me almost cry. It made me smile because when most of these articles were written a few years ago, there was great hope for bilateral cooperation between US and China and the EU and China. But today, not so much. And today, I think we're almost blindly walking into Thucydides' trap, and it worries me very much. So Henry's book really is a roadmap for how to proceed and how to cooperate between the countries of the world. I think it's really necessary reading for anybody who has hope of salvaging our globe. I was listening today to Secretary General Guterres talk about the COP27 and how far behind countries are in their NDCs, and how if we don't get our global act together, we're not going to make it as a world. We're going to reach some kind of a environmental Armageddon, and quite soon we're seeing aspects of it. So it really is important for the countries to cooperate, and Henry provides many prescriptions in the book. Now, one thing that bothers me is that I was on a Zoom call through the Council on Foreign Relations the other day with John Kerry. And John Kerry said that the US and China are still talking about the environment, but there are no active cooperations going on at the moment. We really need those. We don't have time to play political games when the future of the world is at stake. And I think there's both the pluses and minuses to the positions of the countries involved, but we have to get with the program. And so this book, even though maybe at the moment it seems overly optimistic, is a great roadmap for the future and for the present, actually. And I have to say that I learned a lot about Henry from the book, his personal background that others have mentioned. And I think he's a mirror of the Chinese dream and of the changes in China at China's speed that we've seen over the last generation. So I think it's must reading for anybody who can afford to be optimistic or wants to be optimistic, and provides a roadmap for the future. I'm really happy to have read this book from cover to cover. Congratulations, Henry.
Okay, thank you, Harvey. And yes, indeed, it does provide. So for our audience worldwide, this book, this important perspective does indeed, like Harvey Zodin pointed out, provide the right roadmap for a future that is better towards deeper cooperation and one that can understand that our challenges are indeed shared. So how do we solve them? This book can give us the key guidance towards that goal. So now let's invite Liana Lee to give her comments. She is Regional Director for Books, China, Springer Nature. So Liana Lee, your thoughts on the book. What are the important messages in this book from your perspective?
Thank you, and good afternoon from Beijing. I am extremely pleased to attend the book launch of this fifth book by Dr. Wang Huiyao in the book series, China and Globalization. No need to say that this book series has been a phenomenal success among all book series that we publish, not only from China, but from other places that Springer Nature operates in. And this series has now become a multiple award winning series. First of all, the first book in the series, Conflict or Consensus, was granted the Springer Nature China New Development Awards earlier this year. That's the annual book awards that we give every year to, in recognition of contributions by China-based researchers in the area of sustainable research and in supporting the fulfillment of the 7 SCG goals as designed by the United Nations. And later, the responsible editor for this book, Emily Zhang, has won a fabulous employee awards among Springer Nature research publishing editors for producing impactful contents. And then a lot of the books, including the 2 million downloaders, has continuously been generating resonances and attracting attentions among readers around the globe. And I think this series is a typical case of successful collaboration, with CCG being a globally impactful think tank, and with all the famous and influential authors contributing contents to the series, and with the global distribution and promotional channels that Springer Nature offers around the world. And we are particularly happy to see that this content from China and focusing on topics around China has been attracting so important, significant global attentions. And in the end, I think, as everybody has been talking today, is the theme of globalization that this book series has been concentrating on. That is critically important for the whole world, and of course for China. And there is a whole generation of thinkers, entrepreneurs, and all kinds of practitioners, professionals in China who grown and benefiting from the results of globalization and reform of China. So we are all in this synergy to continue the discussion and comments on the effects of globalization at an intellectual level. And we want to do our best to keep this conversation going. And as a publisher, we're very happy and proud to be a bridge, bridging the global community and the Chinese intellectual groups to continue with this conversation. And finally, congratulations again to Dr. Wang for the successful series and also your particular title this time. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Liana Lee. Now let's invite Andy Mock, commentator on CGTN, and someone who's also, Andy, you're also helping the world understand the Chinese perspective. And this book by CCG's work in general, and especially this book, helps understand another dimension of China's experience. So your views on the content? Yeah.
Thank
Over
you,
to you.
Zoom.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zoom. So I also would like to add my congratulations to Dr. Wang on the publication of his new book. I think it's important to point out here that, as Harvey and David mentioned, that there is a personal mention to this book. But more broadly, I think the accomplishment of Dr. Wang as well as Dr. Miao in terms of making sure China's voice is heard in a global context really is incredibly important and is a really significant achievement, because we all know with Western media, even with some Western politicians, it's almost impossible to break through the echo chamber of bias and reflexively negative discussion and thinking around China. And I think Dr. Wang and Dr. Miao have achieved with the Center for China and Globalization is not only getting a hearing, but a respectful and serious consideration of the Chinese perspective. And this is not just in circles that have historically been sympathetic to China. So the corporate business world, certain elements of different government institutions, but even some of the most hawkish. So I know that think tanks, for instance, like Heritage Foundation, like Hudson, also have engaged productively and respectfully with CCG. So I think the accomplishments in general of Dr. Wang and Dr. Miao really should be highlighted, but the series of books in particular, I think, contribute to a candid and respectful dialogue that hopefully will improve relations. I have three broad points or comments I'd like to make about Dr. Wang's book in particular. The first is the period it covers from 2017 to 2021 is, I think, pivotal for US-China relations. So, of course, 2017 marked the beginning of the Trump administration, which we, I think, can point to that as being a kind of a breaking point or a shift change in China-US relations, with a market downturn, with the tariffs, with the attacks against Huawei, et cetera, et cetera. But this period that Dr. Wang covered in his book also includes the election of Joe Biden. And here I'd like to raise an interesting question, in that we, many people in the US, many people around the world, had the hope that with the change in administration, there would be a change in stance towards China. And yet there was not. In fact, again, I think as David mentioned, we've only had ebb, that we seem to have gone from bad to worse. And this is sort of going against what we usually understand of American politics, in particular the four-year presidential cycle, that when there's a change in party, there's often a change in positions as well, and this has not happened. So I'll end my first point here with a question as well. What should we be thinking about in 2024 with another upcoming presidential election? And what did we, collectively get wrong about why was there not a change with the Biden administration? My second point then is related to this, is that while we talk about the ebb and flow of globalization, I would caution us that we maybe should distinguish here that this deglobalization or decoupling, I think, indeed is happening, but it really is an American attack against China. And countries like Russia as well. But broadly speaking, there seems to be, as Dr. Wang, I think's larger point he makes is that globalization is a powerful force. And we see this manifest in two ways. One, even with these unprecedented American attacks against China, trade between the US and China really has not suffered. But from a global perspective, we've seen, I think, enormous strides in globalization, trade between China and Africa, trade between China and ASEAN. And in particular, 2022 marks the advent of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. There have been major advances with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is not just security. So I think that we should be careful here to perhaps distinguish a bit that this is not necessarily an ebb of globalization everywhere, but perhaps, even though it's very important because the US and China are the two largest economies in the world, but it really is limited to a bilateral phenomenon that, again, is rooted in American politics. And related to this point is that I see this US-China conflict as having two theaters. One is ideological, the other is material. And it seems that the US has lost the ideological conflict because these latest measures against China with the semiconductors, blocking not only the chips, but the equipment, not only equipment, but labor or talent flow is unprecedented. And combined with the CHIPS Act, we really can see this as clearly industrial policy. And the American position from an ideological perspective is that the American system works better. Free markets, multi-party, two-party democracy is inherently superior as an ideological moral system. And I think what we've seen is the US has abandoned that. So now the question mark is materialist, meaning that which country, which system will ultimately prevail on a material basis because the US has surrendered the ideological ground. And then that leads me to my third and final point, that the key battleground is in technology. And if you're a video game aficionado like I am, I think we can view this as the last level in the video game, meaning that if you play a video game, the first level is relatively easy, the second level is harder. When you get to the very end, sometimes that's called the boss level. So you fight the most powerful bad guy. And if you defeat that most powerful bad guy, the boss, you've won the game. And I think we are at the boss level battle between China and the US, in that if China can survive this unprecedented full spectrum assault against China's, the US has launched against China's technological development, it will have won not only the ideological battle, but the materialist battle as well. So again, I think Dr. Wang's book focuses on an incredibly important time. We have a lot to learn from this time period, which I think some important lessons have been shared by Dr. Wang. And let me end here with a little bit of a plug for a book that I'm working on. So in terms of technology, as I said, I think that this is the final battle, and whoever wins this battle, or if China can survive, if it does not lose, that in fact, the world will change. So I'm looking at this question of technology in China, but from a longer historical period, starting with the Han Dynasty about 2,000 years ago through today, with hopefully some lessons for the future. So I'm, again, delighted to see the publication of Dr. Wang's book. I think it is very important for the reasons I mentioned. I think I echo David and Harvey's points about how it's a good roadmap. It shares personal experiences from Dr. Wang that I think really are illuminating, educational, but perhaps most of all inspiring. So again, congratulations to Dr. Wang. I would say also congratulations to Dr. Wang and Dr. Miao for the work they've done in ensuring that China's voice is heard even in the most China skeptical circles. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for a really detailed, also not just presenting that understanding of a very important book, which I hope our viewers are now thinking of downloading and reading as soon as possible to understand this journey. But you also talk about a very decisive period we are in, that we have entered. And I think this is the perfect point to invite Dr. Wang to also share your deeper perspective based on what our experts have contributed.
Yeah. Thank you, Loom, and really appreciate all the nice and kind comments and expressions and hopes and all the goodwill that you express. I agree with all of you. I think absolutely it's so important. We are in this very challenging time, and we are in uncharted water now. For the world is more risky and more dangerous actually, as we've seen in the past 5 years. With the Ukraine-Russian war broke out, and the world is in really in a much better shape now than used to be. So we have to be extremely careful. So I think our book is really wants to be a bridge builder and be really get more message across, and then try to promote a better understanding of each other. I think the same is for the Springer Nature. The world-renowned publisher, which really doing a lot of great job like that. So CCG at the think tank, we really want to promote scholar changes, including our series book. Like Dr. Lee mentioned, we had 5 books that in this respect. Of course, this last volume is our personal think tank perspective, but the first 4 are from a variety of scholars, ambassadors, business executives of all over the world. So we really want to promote understanding and then really, solve the issues, maybe help solving the issues of mistrust and also the misunderstanding. And this is so important, particularly after almost 3 years of isolation and separation of pandemic that prevented us. CCG actually conducted the track to dialogue tour to the U.S., to France, Germany, European Union, and of course Asian, Singapore, South Korea. We're actually going to make more such physical exchanges, not only on the books, on Zoom, but also physical exchanges. So again, I just want to thank all our scholars, our publisher, for this really great support. And I think your view is really well reflected for how the international community wants to have more peace and more dialogue and more communication. And our series of books, and including this one, Ebb and Flow of Globalization, is exactly just to do that. So again, I want to thank all of you. Appreciate all you taking time to really share your great views, and particularly to our publisher for really give a lot of attention to our book series and including this book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang. Now let me invite William Akawa. Maybe you can also share some concluding thoughts on basically, obviously, the importance of this book. We are, as Dr. Wang also mentioned, as a think tank, and the series we are talking about China and globalization. The purpose is to improve understanding, and to not only improve, but also further make globalization more inclusive. We are trying to tell China's perspective to the world to help us bridge the gaps and also improve cooperation. So maybe in 1 or 2 minutes, if you can give some remarks, what is the significance of this book, and how can this message be shared in a more effective way moving forward?
Thank you, Zun. Thinking about the speakers today, I think they all touched upon it, and I think people use the word recipe or the word roadmap, and this is, I think, in many ways what this book is, explaining what globalization is and what it. I think in the very, I remember in the preface, Dr. Wang mentioned that there's no such thing as globalized. It's always globalizing. and that to reflect on the ebb and flow. So I think that also this book, in the context of the series China and Globalization, is another just really nice fit into that series, which you see from the very first volume that Dr. Wang and Lu Miao edited, a definite red thread of topics related to globalization that are really important. And I was just texting a little bit with my colleagues about how happy and privileged we feel to be a partner with CCG and their publisher, and we look forward to more volumes to come.
Thanks. Thank you. I think there will be many more volumes.
Yeah, we will.
Come.
Okay.
And let's invite David Blair, the most important message in this book from your perspective.
I think that we're already in a highly, highly dangerous situation for the world. I can't think of any more dangerous period during my lifetime. Maybe even going back to the early 1980s, when there was a lot of fear of war in Europe that easily could have become nuclear. And economically, we're in a highly uncertain period. Looking at the situation in the United States, it looks like the economy is worse than I've seen in my lifetime, and that includes the late 1970s. So I think we're likely to be facing another financial crisis and maybe another depression. And looking at the international situation, I mean, I can't believe we're facing a danger of escalatory sequence in Europe. I can't believe we have leaders that got us into that situation. And we're likely to be having increased possible conflict in Asia. And all these things, there's so many risks out there, all of which could go bad. And I'm not sure that we can avoid them. But I think some of the things that Henry is talking about, of explaining China to the world, helps. I've been amazed at the people that Henry's been able to arrange these dialogues with. I didn't think they would talk to a Chinese think tank, frankly. And he's had very open and extended discussions with very senior Western people who have some influence. So I think that can be helpful. I hope it's enough. I mean, I think there's so many risk factors out there, and frankly, I think we have leaders in the US and in Europe who are making very poor decisions and are likely to get us into worse situations. But what CCG is doing and what Henry has been doing, I think, has been essential toward trying to ameliorate the situation.
Let's hope the impact is increasingly felt in China, beyond China, in different parts of the world. And as you said, we cannot avoid the challenges, but perhaps we can try our best to overcome them. And we see in this book, we have different prescriptions to help us overcome them as a global community. Harvey, from your point of view, the most important message in this book?
The most important message is that we have to work together, the US, Europe, the rest of the world, China, or we're not going to make it. You know, Albert Einstein was once asked what weapons were going to be used in World War III. And he said he didn't know, but he was sure that in World War IV, the weapons would be sticks and stones. And frankly, I think Einstein was overly optimistic. So if we take anything away from this book, we have to redouble our efforts to try to work together in terms of globalization and international cooperation. Now, there's no system of government that's perfect because we live in an imperfect world. But we have to overcome our differences or we're not going to be here. And that goes for the environment. That goes for world peace and how we handle nuclear weapons. And it goes for a wide range of other issues like public health and so on, a crisis over which we still haven't gotten. So the most important message, bottom line of this book, is we have to follow some of these prescriptions and cooperate with each other, but there's not going to be any future. That's my takeaway. And I congratulate everybody involved in the book. And I hope people will pay attention to it because it deserves the attention that people will give it.
Thank you, Harvey. And Liana, from your perspective, I mean, there's so many, there's interest, as you mentioned, in this perspective and an important perspective from China. It is a constructive way to look at the future, encouraging different stakeholders, multiple perspectives to come together and resolve outstanding issues. So from your point of view, Liana, why is any significant message that this book is obviously sharing that would resonate with a global audience?
Well, first, as a Chinese, we should be grateful for the sense of peace and prosperity in the past half century, but we should not take it for granted, no longer take it for granted. And to continue it requests wisdom and courage. And in all trades and in all business, there is a part of every of us to contribute and to be effort for. And I'm happy to be part of this.
Thank you, Liana. And Andy, concluding remarks. Any your thoughts, final thoughts, the most important message?
I don't think there's too much I can add to, I think, what's already been said. But maybe what I can talk about is the book itself as a book, in that I think to reduce the strategic mistrust, increase mutual understanding. We have to think about it like it's kind of like advertising. And there's an old saying in the advertising world that a potential prospect has to see an ad 20 times before they act. So the first time you see it, you completely ignore it. The 10th time, you might remember it. The 15th time, you think, maybe I should buy it. And it's not till you see it the 20th time that you actually go to the store and buy the product. So I think that by having a book, it's working when Dr. Wang isn't, meaning when he's not meeting with people, talking on media, but it also is able to help reinforce the message. So I think it's very, very important as another channel to create greater understanding.
Thank you, Andy. Now over to Dr. Wang.
Yeah. I think we probably come to the end. I really appreciate all your great support, attention, and help, and also all the kind introduction. Of course, we still have a long way to go. I mean, CCG is only 15 years. We've been trying our best to promote. As a bridge between China and outside world, and that's exactly we need scholars like you, and also, of course, a great publisher like Spring Nature. So once again, I appreciate all the attention and all the support, and I particularly want to thank our international readers and our international friends, and also colleagues from different think tanks, media, and of course also policy circles and industry. All walks of life. CCG really appreciate all your attention, and we would like to work with you and to really contribute. I know it's a long journey, but we have to continue. We are living a more, as one of you rightly said, more dangerous world now, and we really want to make a peace and make a mutually acceptable world for a time to come. Thank you all very much again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we wrap up. Thank you, Dr. Wang, really for the book. I'll add a little comment of my own. I've been in China for 7 years, and 2014, when I wanted to come, we did not have access to this kind of perspective from China. It was very difficult to understand China's journey, China's point of view. And I think for a global audience, for not just people studying international relations or history or politics, for people in general, China's speed, scale, and scope of improvement, of reform, opening up and engaging the world is intriguing, it is fascinating, and there are valuable lessons for all of us to learn. So do download our entire series, and this last book of the series, the 5th book, The Ebb and flow of globalization to really understand this journey. And do follow Center for China and Globalization's work. So once again, thank you to Andy, Harvey, David, William, and Liana Lee, and all of our audience. Download the book, do raise questions, any questions, queries you have, and follow CCG's work, which is there to connect the world. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.